Good afternoon, Lucas Meadowcroft here from CROFTi, and this beautiful day we've got an amazing guests, both Vannesa and Leanne, to join us, which we're going to be talking all things COVID and business related. So I'll introduce them in a sec, but as you've previously, I guess, listened to and what we've gone through in this particular series that we're doing, is telling with business owners how COVID has affected them, and then how they come up with new and innovative ideas to be able to pivot their organisation to move forward, whether it be their entire business or whether it just be a product or service that they're going through. This conversation will be slightly different, I dare say, but I guess we'll dig into it and we'll see how we go, because these amazing ladies, as we're about to find out, a wealth of knowledge in all things business, entrepreneurship, and obviously pushing the boundaries. So I'll firstly, thanks for jumping on today, guys. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll just pass it over to yourselves to introduce. So I might just start with yourself, Leanne. I'll switch you on and take over.
Hey everyone, my name's Leanne Kemp. I'm Queensland's Chief Entrepreneur. I'm the third entrepreneur to be appointed in this role. It's an honorary role appointed by the Minister for Innovation and the Premier. And our office is the connective tissue across Queensland from an innovation and entrepreneur perspective. We connect with startups, scale-ups, universities, and government, as well as corporates, in helping to form and reform innovation across the state of Queensland. I also started my own company. This is my third business. I've successfully exited them all. And this last business that I've started is Everledger in 2015. We operate in 6 countries in the world. We're a technology company that provides a platform of provenance to help with traceability. So we track diamonds, coloured gems, art, wine, and we have about 100 people in the organisation today.
Oh.
Helps to unmute myself. The amount of knowledge and stuff I've seen, just heard from around the traps and gone through, it's just amazing. So I'll get into that a bit more detail. I'll hand over to yourself, Vannesa, and go for it.
Hi everyone, my name's Vannesa Garrard. So I'm chairman of Bravehearts. I'm also an investor in 7 other companies, and I've been an entrepreneur since the age of 12 and started 20 of my own companies, both in Australia and overseas, in Hong Kong, China, US, UK. So all in consumer products. So this time I'd love to spend some time delving into what we've learnt along the way with the entrepreneur community about how they've dealt with, changes in retail landscape and sourcing products, and generally just pivoting their businesses. There.
Yeah, sorry. I was playing with the settings. So I was making sure LinkedIn Live was working, because we got LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live at the exact same time right now, which is super cool. Thanks for the intro, girls. I really appreciate it. And I love the fact that throughout your journey and what I've been following is just be able to give back to many, many people. And this is really crucial in this situation that we've all gone through, obviously through this COVID situation. And there's no reason, I dare say, there's no doubt in the world that the last 10 years or 20 years that you've been in multiple different businesses, you've gone through your major pitfalls. And obviously in this particular situation, there's, I would say, not much difference, but there is obviously a big difference in the world that we live in now. Going to go down the route of obviously how it's affected you personally. I'm happy to have this, I guess, open conversation, but if you want to dive deep into your own business world and what you've seen, more than happy to. I do know that the tech industry has kind of really succeeded throughout this entire journey that we've seen in the last few months. I'm actually keen to understand from yourself, Leanne, around your tech business, and have you found the same thing, or is it like every other business that's had a massive downturn? But just really cool to understand, not just from a business perspective, but also a mindset shift and what you've had to go through with your teams and your leaderships, and get everyone on tap to actually make sure that this you do come out the other side successful. So do you mind just jumping in first, Leanne, and just really keen to understand what you've gone through?
Muted. Here we go. The mic is unmuted. Sure. Look, Everledger started in the heart of London in 2015, and we effectively provide digital twin technology to really opaque supply chains in the world. Highly valuable or mostly even invaluable supply chains to a certain extent. So we work with diamonds and coloured gemstones. We also do the traceability of cobalt and lithium for the battery supply chain, these finite resources. But the physical supply chains in the midst of COVID stopped, completely stopped. In fact, in the diamond industry, about 90% of the world's diamonds are cut and polished in one geographical location in the world, in a place called Surat, which is about 3 hours outside of Mumbai, which is a regional centre in India. So yes, whilst digital companies have thrived through COVID, certainly it was a lot of digital communication technologies that were actually thriving, or even education technologies. I would say that our supply chains physically stopped, and so therefore the need for digital trade also stopped, because the physicality of the movement of goods ceased to move. We work with blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine vision. We have about 100 people in the organisation, and by very nature, we are actually distributed. We work on distributed technologies, and we're distributed in our workforce. And so really the operations of the day-to-day didn't change too much for us. We were well funded. We raised about $20 million in the last number of years on our Series A, with really great lead investors for Tencent, Fidelity, Bloomberg, Rakuten, and these are all investors that supported Everledger. So we were well positioned from a capital perspective to see us through at least the first wave of the concern of COVID. But of course, you can't take away from the severity of the moment in the concern for everyone's well-being, both physically and mentally. So a lot of work was done across the organisation to ensure a very clear communication pathway was set down, to ensure that we actually started to take on a really important widening role of the responsibility of the mental health of not only direct employees, but also we saw incredible implosions economically, where a lot of the spouses, husbands and wives were losing their jobs, were being made redundant in various countries of the world. And this was coming in sort of waves geographically. I would say Australia has actually posed out very well, considering when we look at the backdrop of the morbidity rates that exist in other operational centres in like South America as a prime example, and in Africa where we have our customer bases. But what we did was we had to make a decision. In fact, this was a part of a keynote I delivered as Chief Entrepreneur very early in the COVID days. Do you pivot? Do you persevere? Or do you pirouette? Do you entertain sort of a change in business process? We persevered right the way through the eye of the storm. We've had no layoffs of any work. In fact, if anything, we've continued headcount, incremental growth. And what we did is we said, let's put the customer at the centre of our business. Let's work hard with them to co-evolve and see whether we can become an essential service for them when the markets reopen. And so we took a huge emphasis in our CX environment, our customer engagement environment, as well as our product. And so we did 2 years of coding effectively, where we pivoted our internal resources into different teams, and we went hard on our product featuring. And we're coming out of that now in a faster cadence of product releases. So I'll talk a little bit further down the track on what I think in terms of leadership, what type of leadership actually drives through uncertainty, and it really sits at the heart of entrepreneurship. So there's a lot to be learnt through this time.
Yeah, definitely. I guess so. Pivotal to what you're saying is around, you were able to take that, I guess, the negative and repurpose what you had already put in plan and what you're trying to achieve. And obviously, you jammed into a few months to get your team on board. But interesting is you're saying you're a tech business, but then obviously the huge part of your business relies on product, in this case, gems, right? And so I dare say there would have been numerous board investor meetings around this conversation and say, well, we're not going to be able to provide these gems. We're not going to be able to provide the actual product or stock, and obviously the income might be reduced. And I could be completely wrong here, but it sounds like the income would have been reduced. But we're not going to lay off staff. We're going to keep resources on board, but we're actually going to repivot them into a different area and get their buy-in to allow that to continue to actually happen. Is that a thing?
Yeah, look, we're a Series A raised company. Our board is 2 people. So no, there wasn't a lot of board discussion. We have the board is there to ensure governance controls are in place, and those governance controls are most certainly in place. So in fact, actually, it's the leadership team, the responsibility to be stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details, which is really one of the mantras internally with Everledger. And no, we didn't have to seek out this additional blessing, support, or even involvement from a board level. In fact, that's what enables us to move fast, is to not be bogged down with the heightened red tape around the board. The board is here to support the CEO. In fact, not the other way around.
Love it, and I love that that's what you put in place. Sweet. I think next conversation could definitely continue. I'll throw it over to Vannesa now, and if you don't mind going through a bit of your journey, before COVID, and maybe that whole conversation around board investors too.
Yeah, well, look, I think, and I could talk to it from a couple of different angles in that if we look through the Bravehearts scenario as chair and the board there, it was definitely, you're right, Leanne, it was about supporting the CEO, but there were some tough decisions that had to be made because that's all funded. And on the back of the bushfires and then COVID and, everyone struggling and out of work, it was pretty difficult to get the donations in, right? So, and it's 90% funded by the community, not from government. So that was challenging in itself for that particular enterprise, but the team, and particularly from the leadership level, really open, transparent with the team, and what it did was, it was really cool opportunity in that things that we'd wanted to do for a long time in terms of making everything digital and getting a lot of our face-to-face services online and on e-platforms, it actually pushed that forward. So that really helped us because we had the time to re-engineer and refocus the team and repurpose them to deliver on those new projects. So what it means on the other side of this is that we'll have all digital options in place, but we actually need a lesser team level, right? So we've been able to reinvest a lot of the money into platforms and tools that can actually reach a bigger audience with the children that we help in the community. So from Bravehearts' point of view, was all about operational and all about how we get that digitized, and that worked particularly well. In terms of consumer products, I think obviously a lot of the stores were shut. They weren't moving product, but it did force everyone to go online. So the smart businesses I've invested in and the smart CEOs have actually took the opportunity to double down on the e-commerce side. There are a couple that kind of wanted to stay the course, and that obviously hasn't come through with the numbers because, if you're not shipping product and you don't have an e-commerce front, that made it challenging. So I think what I've experienced most through this was the CEOs and the entrepreneurs that were looking at opportunities and double down have come out of this extremely well and will continue to. The ones who, basically had their head in the sand and just thought, don't change anything and it'll be okay and it's not really a problem and business is going to go on as usual, they've faced significant challenges, and I think they will continue to. So all the way through this, I think this is just entrepreneurship in general, right? It's our job as entrepreneurs to find the opportunities, to innovate, to pivot, pirouette, all of that is general. But I'm surprised at how many people almost paralyzed by this scenario.
We'll have this conversation only, what was it, a week or 2 weeks into COVID when we were on that call. And it's like, this is the perfect time to pivot. Like, there's no excuses anymore. So I've had this conversation quite often with business owners, right, where it's like, when we fail in business, it's always our fault. We take all the blame. It's, there's no other excuse. It's our fault. This situation, not that you want to blame anyone, maybe you could blame figures, who knows, but this is more an opportunity to not use all that energy and blame yourself, but use the energy in a creative way and use it to come up with new products and services and pivot in a different direction. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people stuck in the mud, in that mindset around traditional business. I've done it the way I've always done it, and that's just how it is. Have you found, it sounds like you found that across some of your businesses as well, and the leaders in those businesses?
Well, some of them you have to kind of pull along with as a board going, come on guys, see the opportunity and everything, like they kind of panic in a corner and fetal position for a bit, and you're going, come on, get up, let's go, what can we do? And really take that time to throw everything out and pull your business model apart. And not saying your strategy still stays on point, right? But how you do it, exactly what you said before, Leanne, about, we're straight on board with the strategy, but there are different ways to do it. And we're faced with this sort of situation. And luckily for a lot of my businesses, for the last 13 years, we've always worked remotely. And I guess you would too in yours, Leanne, is that it didn't cause too much trouble for us to work. And it doesn't matter where we work from because we had all the tools to do it. So that was a benefit for us, and it was just business as usual. So we doubled down on starting some new companies. We built those in lightning speed. So it just shows what you can do, right? When you're back to the wall.
Yeah, I've literally had conversations with.
It's interesting in the pivot. I mean, we certainly see demand-led pivots. So, for example, there was a heightened state of anxiety around ventilators and PPE and even sanitizers. And in our ability across Queensland to be able to pivot businesses that might have the skills, currency, the workforce, the equipment to once make gin and now make hand sanitizers. But there's also a risk in pivoting, because particularly when we see peaks out of crises like we have done, that demand can be created and can disappear literally in a heartbeat and overnight. So there's a real sense in being able to understand sort of the longevity in the pivot. Is this a pivot that actually answers a problem today, or are we actually pivoting to truly pivot the long-term strategy of the organisation? So there's a lot of conversations that need to be had, and certainly the decision-making process needs to be compressed in such a way that it supports that anxiety approach to solving that real problem now when the back's up against the wall. We also saw in Queensland an incredible call out, and luckily enough, we didn't have the morbidity rates that other countries did. But of course, it was very early when people were concerned about ICUs and ventilators. And if we needed to have life support systems in place, we simply didn't have enough here in this country. And we weren't able to source it internationally. So we had to spin up the innovation ecosystem. And of course, I was at the forefront of a lot of that triage event with government. And what we saw, and we had to make very clear, it's less about ideas in a time of a crisis, and it's more about solutions. So really, a PowerPoint might get you funding in a good MVP with an investor, but it's not going to get you the order when you're right in the middle of a scenario like a COVID. So more solutions, less ideas in the time of a crisis. So hence that pivot has to be material. You've got to look at, do you have, and where will you find the capital? Do the skills that you have in the existing organisation, you can't go out and try and employ another 30 people and skill them up because the idea is a good idea. You simply don't have the time. So, you know, those companies that were able to do that well were well positioned, not only in the innovation logic or the leadership style, but they also had a significance of understanding of the types of human resources and human capital they had in the organisation to be able to agile their approach into strategy and execution.
I think the other thing we've seen is where assets too, like I'd encourage a lot of discussion about what assets do you already have in your business. They're not pivoting away completely, but their core product might have been a physical or a service model. What have they got in assets, right? Because we actually take it for granted as businesses, and we've done something for 10 years or 20 years. If we've done the right thing, refined that process, there's something valuable in that. So actually delving through with a lot of the entrepreneurs and other business people I know in Brisbane particularly, and saying, okay, what else have you got? Let's really have a look at what's on your balance sheet, or what digital assets, or what assets have you got that you could maybe put into being saleable. And so there were a lot of businesses that we worked with that had some awesome processes for training their teams, and then said, well, why don't you put them online and offer them out to other small businesses? And they've been able to make a revenue stream from that.
There's a fine equilibrium between having resources and being resourcefulness, right? There's a really interesting learning in that. One of the great companies, of course, is Stage Kings. You know, they make a lot of the stage, the temporary stage and stair structures. And of course, all of the events dried up. There was no more music festivals that were around. But overnight, they created ISO Kings, which was furniture. His wife went down to the shops to try and buy a desk for their home, knowing that everyone had to work from home and the kids were at home. And there was a sellout from the likes of, we went to Kmart and Target, and then also went across into IKEA, and they were sold out of desks. So within his own business, had the ability to actually pivot from not just making stages and stairwells, but actually making desks. And now I had a town hall with him this week, and ISO Kings and that brand is more well known now for those that have bought those desks than his original business. So now he's actually probably got two hands on two steering wheels, not just one.
Yeah, right. Cool.
It's all about the mindset, right? Because if you can use this period to go, well, that's happened, let's just get on with it and just move on. It's a perfect opportunity to. Another great local example here, and I won't go into too much detail here, but one of my mates of mine runs a car parking business. Obviously, car parking is not a thing. As soon as everyone starts working from home, it's gone. So quickly pivoted into doing drive-through sanitizers. So put up sanitizer booth and then turn all these car parks into people can drive through, pick up sanitizer. Obviously, that only lasted for a period of time, and so he's pivoted into drive-in theaters and drive-in movies. So taking one business and pivoted 3 times within 3 months to keep not just keep his staff employed, but like triple his staff, because obviously he got so much demand. And so it's that being really agile. But I think that's because the entrepreneur in us, failure is not an option, right? So we have to think on our feet, and we have to move on to get over the speed bump pretty quickly. But it's when you've got what the larger organizations I've been talking to that can't pivot, is because they've got boards and approval processes and all this just stuff that doesn't need to happen, and just slow them down.
But I think, the pivot thing was a lot of desperation, right? So that's a lot of people going, shit, I need some income, right? We need some revenue. What do we do quickly and take advantage, right? So that's a short, very, like you were saying before, Leanne, it's a short-term opportunity, and they jumped on that. What I've encouraged a lot of entrepreneurs and startups particularly is to think about that long-term. So if you've got the time now to stop and really, because you're not spending as much time face-to-face in meetings or traveling and doing those things, what parts of the business, in terms of cost structure, more efficiency, what are you touching? What are the actual costs of your business? And understanding that more, to then when you come out the other side, are the things that you can put in place now that make you more profitable, 6 months from now, right? So we're looking at, what in their balance sheet or the P&L could they be reducing in terms of cost structure? Because sometimes, especially when you're starting up, you're running a mile a minute. Have you actually stopped to look at that strategically and say, is there, without cutting headcount, if you can help it, but are there normal costs that lie within the business that could be smarter, right, and managed a bit better in terms of COGS and all those sorts of things? And really looking into that and saying, how do you make that more profitable, even if your revenue reduces, you come out and your bottom line's still healthy?
No other times to do it, right? So it's a perfect opportunity. So why not? I guess, I don't know if you also saw this, was the startup communities that you both ladies are in is probably different to the more mature organizations I've been dealing with, the mindset at least. The operational conversation doesn't seem to be as easy that we've had, because it's like, well, yeah, sure, but that doesn't solve our problem now. That might solve a problem in 6 or 12 months from now, but I need an answer and I need a solution right this second. Have you got seen in your particular world around the mindset conversation? Because I assume that's completely different from mature organizations and people being in business for 50 years versus startup ecosystem.
Yeah, look, there's well-formed research around this, the strategic logic versus innovation logic, and the big question about why do some companies sustain high growth in revenue and profits and others don't? Why do teams thrive in uncertainty and others completely fall apart? And when we think about business logic or business as usual or that hierarchical order, there's a prescribe and control mechanism, whereas in innovation logic and entrepreneurship, it's more free in terms of its enablement and learning. In business, when we have a CEO and a typical structure, of course, there's hierarchical command and interdependencies that are very simple and prescribed, whereas in innovation, it's, of course, around teaming and distributed teaming, and the interdependencies are actually quite complex. There's more emphasis on experimentation, which is why we are able to sort of entertain this strategy whilst in execution mode, which it doesn't necessarily actually adhere well, because typically within a well-structured or a long-term organisation, there is a lot of paper prototypes that run. There's a lot of justification at a board level, a lot of budgetary concerns. There's headcount that's to be consulted. So it is interesting. The innovation logic differs to conventional strategic logic because the basic dimensions of strategy, execution, formation, and reformation is completely different. Many existing companies let competitors set the parameter of strategic thinking, whereas entrepreneurs and innovators, they don't use rivals as benchmarks. We're actually, the rival for us is the challenge to be solved, not what's the competitor doing.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Absolutely love that.
Agreed.
I'd like to just pivot the conversation, if you don't mind, around the product side of it, because a lot of conversations I've been having with service-based businesses, like we can easily pivot our business. We can, get like you talked about before, Vannesa, we can turn our product or our IP into a service base and productize it and launch it and go into an online store and start selling our IP. Product, obviously importing products from, let's call it China or elsewhere, And then obviously that demand obviously is been stifled through this entire process. I think you mentioned previously that is starting to open up again, and we can start importing product and start getting. But there's been a lot of companies that have pretty much lost the legs on their business overnight because of this whole we're relying on product to sell. And I'm not sure with yourself, Leanne, around the conversation with product-based businesses. I'm really interested to see what you're seeing in this playing field.
Look, from my side, there's a lot of product-based businesses that are B2B that are sitting on loads of stock in their warehouses, right? So, and they just don't have the e-commerce platform. And it's traditional business that you don't sell direct. You're a wholesaler, you're a distributor, you're an importer. You don't go direct because you don't want to cut off your retailers. And the reality is that every single one of those businesses hurt through this process, and they've still got stock they need to sell. So they had to pivot, and that's where the biggest challenge is, and exactly the type of customer base or people you're talking about, Lucas, is they didn't want to change, right? They've done it for 20, 30, 40 years. They don't want to change it. Oh, we don't need a website. We don't want to go e-commerce. And you're saying, guys, you need to do it, right? And if there's nothing telling you otherwise from an e-commerce or shopper, insights and how they're shopping now, is that this isn't going away. It never has been. We need to embrace the online experience and making it, frictionless for customers to order your product. So they need to get it online.
There's a big challenge we have to solve here in Queensland, and that's the tyranny of distance and the cost of transport. And, today, tragically, we saw Qantas, 6,000 jobs, of course, being stood down, which really compromises just not only the transportation route of people, but also sitting within the bellies of those planes are premium, high-value products and exports directly out of some of our regional town centres. So I do think that the digital transformation to be able to connect those physical goods out in a trade environment with the world is desperately needed. But we also have to sort of recalibrate this global and local market. We have to crack our ability to do goods transportation across Queensland in a far greater way than ever before. So is that better rail infrastructure? Is it better transportation routes of goods? Because otherwise what will happen is that all of a sudden the customer has moved. The customer is no longer going to be easily accessible or affordable to deliver to into Japan. So where is our customer? That's a really big question we need to be asking ourselves now. Yeah. And if our customer is only within an arm's length reach out in a regional town and community, then you've really got to start thinking about other ways to leverage partnerships, distributed manufacturing. Is there a way to be able to bring up a right to manufacture or a right to distribute? So I think partnerships are going to become sort of the strength of the economy most definitely in time, because we won't be able to build the roads quick enough or the trains quick enough, but we can actually create this co-opetition environment where we have competitors, but all of a sudden now they've got to become our partner. The frenemies of which was once our enemy now has to become our closest friend. And maybe there's actually something in the collective nature of that will help actually lift the economy.
Yeah. This going on political rated, yes, 100%. I agree with you, and I've had so many conversations with manufacturers and people who buy goods from overseas and resell it here in Australia. But the biggest issue is the wage cost, right? And so it's like, well, we just can't manufacture it here in this country for what people are willing to pay for, and that's been the biggest. Like, I've actually spoken to people who have got product businesses, and they said we want to manufacture in the country. We've reached out to so many manufacturers, they just won't do it for us.
We need to start moving the needle on that. We need to be competing on durability. We don't have legislation in this country that has an end-of-life legislation. We're selling toasters in Kmart for $7 because the externality of cost is actually on the burden of all of us as citizens, because that toaster is not going to make it to its first-year birthday. It's going to end up in landfill in one of our council dumps or in the green bin somewhere. So that entire thing does need to change, and it will change because it has to change. We can't even take our waste across the border now. China closed its borders to waste, and they've got a federal minister for circular economy, which of course they know there's value in waste. So this is my rant of the day. Like, if there is to be a church of Leanne, it's the church of circular economy, because now is the prime moment to start seeing waste as value.
Yeah. I'm doing a lot of projects actually on waste. and really going full circle to make sure that we can deal with it in each council. And so there's quite a few really interesting projects going on with that. I don't get why we transport waste and make it somebody else's problem, right? And the cost and everything involved in that is ridiculous. So there's some ways that I'm working through some really innovative companies in Brisbane, actually. But there's a lot of work being done in that space.
Sounds really like it's cool. Just not fast enough, right?
The challenge, I think, I think the challenge really is, and I have this debate all the time, because 25 years in sourcing products and millions of products every year, you always get the thing of saying, we need Australian made, and the challenge always is all the raw materials, right? So if we're talking electronics, so a big part of my business is consumer electronics. We don't have there's no one here who can actually do it, right? Not to the level or the amount of spec or product that we need. So we need to do it, and we'd love to do it locally. I think assembly we can definitely do, and we do that wherever we can. Packaging, there's a whole heap of things that can be done in Australia, but unfortunately we're still a fair way off trying to, and there is a shift towards more manufacturing in country, but we are a long way away from being able to do that. So
is that because we just don't produce the actual raw material here in the country? We have to import the raw material first. We can't just produce it here. Is that that's the reason?
Even we're talking about things like everyone's excited about mask factories and things, manufacturing. You go, but your raw materials are still coming from China, right? So it's understanding the whole end-to-end solution here. Any of the materials that they're using, all the sewing, anything is pretty much is a China base to it. So we need to understand, while there's a part that we can own in terms of innovation, creativity, design, all of that we can own as Australians and Queenslanders. We need to understand, just the practicalities of where these products are coming from, and how do you replace every part of that to make that ecosystem happen.
So the larger conversation about this whole COVID and China scenario, and people not wanting to buy any goods from China in the future, just won't happen. Even though you might think that, and that's the direction you want to go, where it's going to continue anyway.
But we can. But I do believe in agriculture. I do believe in food. There's a lot of things that we can do locally, but there are a lot of raw, hard goods that we don't have anywhere near the facilities or the infrastructure to do that in Australia. Yeah. And that's because that ended 50 years ago, right?
Intel Inside as a trust brand for electronics. I think China Inside is probably a brand that they haven't put on the forefront of devices, but you're right. There's so much material in its componentry stage which still has to be sourced from Asia.
Yeah, it's tough.
But there's a lot more we can do in terms of controlling part of that process here.
So awesome opportunity is what you're saying is, if you can take the third or a half of what you can do in Australia and make that happen, and the rest stays in countries such as China. Yeah, cool. So from I guess the state of play as it is now, it seems like, and of course I expected this year, the way you guys are wired, it's like, just forward through. It's a challenge. We've accepted it. We've moved on. The state of play that we're currently in now, and what we see coming out of this, and what the next steps look like. Did you already have like a 12-month plan or a 2-year plan or 3 or 5-year plan in place, and you just have to tweak it slightly, or does this reinvent what you had already had ready to go?
Look, ours has always kept the same strategy. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think the timeline in decision making has been brought forward, right? So if the plan needs to be thought about, calibrated, recalibrated, and then maybe in the recalibration there's no change, but it's a constant state of flux right now, and there are large tectonic plate shifts occurring globally and even locally. The change to the way upon which we work, the how we interact as citizens, that is a constant calibration and recalibration, and will be for the better part of the next, year to 2 years. But luckily we're human, right? We've been through this evolutionary process for millions and billions of years, and we're well versed at this. So let's hope. This is probably, for me, one of the greatest behavioural science experiments that we will ever see, because it's given us greater insight into who we are as humans and our reactiveness to each other. We're herd animals by its very core, but I also think we'll even change the way that we recruit, the types of questions we're asking, because there's something in the learning through this crisis, but there's also something in the weathering of this from a physical sense as well as mental health. And I would gather that most of those questions weren't natural questions to be asked when you employ someone. In fact, sometimes they're seen to be quite private questions to ask. But right now, it's nearly all bets are on the table, not even off the table, because it's going to take so much more to be able to get through this in a healthy state, to keep the prosperity of our state moving, that we just have to find a way. Not even wanting to find it, we have to find it.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you want to add anything to that, Vannesa?
No, I agree completely. I think it's I think what will come out of that is we're talking about even the way employees, looking at project-based work from now on, and how you get to even reassign. So what a lot of companies I've worked with, we're helping each other with teams and knowledge, and I think that's got to happen a bit more. A lot of companies might have some great talent. They do a project, they keep, employ a team member, but maybe that team member could jump into somebody else's business and help out. So I think there's a lot more that could be done in terms of collaboration and sharing the learnings, right? I think everyone's a little bit more willing. Like, we've always done that. I think it was always a part that I didn't want to, if I had some knowledge that could help it make it easier for somebody else, I wanted to share that, right? Because, I wish I'd had that when I was younger. And I think everyone's a little bit more open to that. It's not a pride thing that this is a really shit situation, or I don't know what to do right now. You get certain things where you hit your head against the wall going, well, shit, what do I do? And I think it's not a sense of having to hide that or having to have all the answers. It's about having to talk to other people and know that you can reach out and say, well, what do you think, right? I'm thinking this, or I've got this idea, or do you know someone who could help me with this? And being more collaborative in general, I think is really.
I think all communities have come together. Like, I've been having, these type of ongoing conversations with businesses all around the world, the Western world, I should say, and everyone's just communicating and collaborating with each other as it is. Like, this happened. It's like we've become closer than we ever have before, on a super large scale. So I think what you're saying is 100% right, and that really intrigues me. But my thought process goes, well, what does that mean in 12 months or 2 years or 5 years from now? Are we going to go back to the stupid humans we were, or are we going to continue along that process and actually, embrace this change?
You'd hope they embraced it, but some people will be stupid and go back, won't they? No,
what I found fascinating is this, the collective power that was brought together through this crisis is one thing, and the communication is another. But it was actually quite incredible, the large-scale coordination, the ability for us to coordinate through 3 tiers of government, of course, through different departments and decision-making processes, and then even community, who followed a very clear set of leads. Yes, we weren't perfect at it, but as we start to reflect on other segments of the world, we were actually leading and have led. I mean, I think New Zealand beat us to the post in how they led through this crisis. They're a smaller country. They have 2 tiers of government, but I feel as though success comes from less about yes, most definitely coordination, but it's the mixture of coordination, communication, and collaboration. If you get those 3 things right, it's the perfect pirouette, not even a pivot, because you find yourself moving and then you end up in this sort of central place in a different environment with muscle strength. So I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I love seeing all the latest flights and holiday destination advertising that's coming out, and it's like Greece, Croatia, and I think it's Israel. Like, they're really pushing that the only countries in the world that can come and visit us is Australia, New Zealand. Like, it just goes to show that we're on the world stage now, and I think the Kiwi leader definitely is on the world stage.
Not only that, there's something bigger here, right? When we think about the formation of the European Union, that was really to be acted as one, right? Even though there were separate boundaries across different countries. But when push came to shove and people's lives were at risk and supply chains were constricted, those free trade agreements, or that embodiment of one, all of a sudden went out the window. So what's the power of the strength of free trade agreements? These collective, consolidations of the EU. But we are actually now forging entirely new international relationships. The travel bubble that will exist and is becoming now more formalized with New Zealand as an example, Israel, as you say, that's really exciting for Australia. It's not only just putting Australia on the map because we're a great place to be, but new economic export value will be created through these countries that we would once have considered to be small markets, but now they're safe. So if we can get that engagement, we could probably actually turn economic value in a far greater and a far quicker way than maybe the bigger, more complicated markets. That's not to retract away from the giants like doing business with China and the US and of course with the UK, but arguably that's becoming even more complicated over time.
Yeah, that's super cool. I have had a question come through, so this takes us a bit off different direction of what we've just been chatting on, but I'm keen to get both your thoughts around this. So the question is around family-owned businesses, and so this is like a traditional organization that's been running for many years, and they're always planning on handing down that organization to their kids. And what we're seeing, and I'll relate to this, and I'll let you guys take over. The newer generation coming through are just wanting to be freelancers. They're just wanting to do their own thing and travel and do lifestyle and work in multiple different companies and not be stuck down to a 9-to-5 job for the next 30 years. The family-owned businesses that are wanting to hand down their business to their kids and they get their kids to run it, obviously I can see that just disappearing to a degree. I'm really keen to get your thoughts around this.
Yeah, I see that from an investment point of view. So the companies I'm working with raising capital, a lot of those companies are, as soon as they get that third or fourth generation, they don't have the same passion for it. They are so, and I think there's a challenge because that first generation really went through the hard part of entrepreneurship and felt that pain. And as you go down, it gets sort of a little, I guess for most of them, gets a little bit easier. They don't have the same passion for it. So I think we're finding a lot of those companies looking to sell out completely and get out of the business because the third or fourth generation don't want to take it over. And actually, to a big part, a lot of those family businesses are actually everyone wanting to get out. So it's not about they just don't want to lead it and they want to stay in it. They've had enough of it, right? So I think it's a general for family business. We're seeing more than ever a lot of them exiting to completely different sources, whether it's private equity or trade sales. I think it's definitely happening a lot more than it would have been 5 years ago.
Or just closing up shop maybe and just moving on.
Yeah, there's a few of those too, right?
Look, I think generational businesses and the knowledge that they hold and even the data that they have, even though it might be unstructured and sitting in filing cabinets, is invaluable. Sometimes you can't create that lived experience in an environment like now, but we need to preserve generational wealth and family generational businesses. So when I think it's a shame that we're getting to the point where we're just not even wanting to hand over the baton, but rather someone just wants to drop it on the fourth change, because when we see the reinvention of business, you could actually invent new business models out of concrete foundations, which are not necessarily the old infrastructure. It's the new infrastructure, the digital tooling, the data that could actually be made available, but also with the use of existing sets of data and artificial intelligence, you can create entirely new revenue streams and business models off this. And I think that that's not being taught. It's not being spoken about, and we should actually be putting the resources behind it to really leverage what is actually an asset that could trampoline into entirely new companies and new businesses. We're seeing it in some of the industrialization work that's being done in welding, as an example, where we've got welders that are ticketed, that are on the tools day in, day out, that have been steel manufacturers. But now, of course, you could have augmented welders, the ability to take this technology and bring both that together as well as with the welding school sets. That can create entirely new education platforms, certification platforms, and that's a third generation business that should actually spin out entirely new ways of modality and operations. But as you say, it's being sold based on its performance to date, not on its potential into tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely love that. So this is such a hot topic because this is one of my visions, is to get to the point to be able to buy these mature organizations, typically at a rate that they wouldn't normally be able to sell for, and then turn them around using tech and innovation to be able to turn them around to either sell them or keep them long term. But you're right, the education's not out there, or if the education is out there, there's too many acronyms. People don't understand it. They don't get the concept around how they can actually work. Which is, usually why, we have a job at the end of the day. It's why we're going from an innovation consulting point of view to actually help these mature companies. But how do you push that out into a mass market, and how do you get everyone to understand that it's even possible? But not just that, it's the conversations with these the 60 plus year old people, it's like they're not interested. They don't want to have these conversations. They've done their years and they just want to move on and enjoy retirement.
The diamond industry is a generational business that's been handed down over the better part of the last 500 years. Diamond manufacturers, of course, represent about 90% of the trade in India, and there's about 4 generations that have been involved. And some of those companies are billion-dollar companies, but the industry created young diamanteers, which are the junior CEOs of the organisation that, of course, are stepping into the shoes of their predecessor, whether it be their father or their grandfather. And what I find really interesting is just the way upon which we interact with our industry. The modality of dealing with the CEOs of some of the big diamond industries are still very much face-to-face, and very much in an environment of the old bourses or the trading environments, which are physical paper, a handshake and a promise to pay. But yet the young diamanteers have all come together and they consistently trade, communicate, and engage across WhatsApp or WeChat platforms. So that's a new form of next generational knowledge, and also new forms of way upon which trade is happening. And what I'm seeing now is really interesting, that the strength through COVID is giving more voice to the realities of that youth generation. So there could be something in banding together an environment, a peak body of this, next generation youth that at least can actually share that knowledge across either one industry or multiple industries.
EY do a good next gen groups. They get a lot of the next gen, so I've been involved in a few of those. That's quite good. But then a lot of them actually, what we're finding is a lot of them are wanting to go out and do philanthropic work rather than work in the business. So I think that's definitely a challenge in how you keep that family business running, and try and keep some of that, the family in it, rather than venturing off.
That's because they've been brought up in this situation, I guess.
Philanthropic, right? The money's got to come from somewhere, so it's got to come from its source, and the source is likely to be the generational wealth.
But that's also a hot topic around the conversation of, when they've seen their parents go through all the struggles, they're like, well, I don't want to go through those struggles. I just want to enjoy the fun side of it. And so how do you put education around that to tell them, well, you've got to go through the struggles to actually get to that point?
That's why my 4 kids, starting entrepreneurs and those that stop at the first hurdle, right? The same thing happens. Yeah. You want to be an entrepreneur, you want to build a business like a zebra or a unicorn, then you've got to do the hard yards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had something to say, Vannesa?
Oh, no, I was going to say my kids, I remember my daughter coming in the office one day and said, when am I'm going to own this one day. Like, no, you're not. You're going to start your own. And my poor kids going, go and start your own bloody business. But they all have their own ideas, and I hate the idea of actually getting stuck in something. I think you like the kind of challenge and the, starting up and innovation and whatever else. So I think it'd be, I can't imagine actually sitting in a business for 30 or 40 years.
I told my father-in-law when he was 72 and he was not able to walk very well, I said, what you need to do now is go skiing. And he said, I can't hardly walk. I'm in a wheelchair. I said, no, skiing. You need to go skiing. Spend the kids' inheritance. That's what you got to do now. Go enjoy it.
Go enjoy life. Yeah, it's those the conversations you normally have around these really mature companies, and they haven't had a holiday in 5, 10, 15 years because they've been stuck in the business. It's like, oh, it's so sad. Anyway, to wrap up, I'd love to get any key points or what you've seen, I guess, the big shifts from a mental state perspective, because there's a massive conversation around mental health and not just from the business owners and employees, but obviously now all the way down to kids with the whole, schooling from home and then going back to school and being bullied. Like, there's a whole mental health conversation that we could spend an hour on. Is there any key scenarios that you've seen to try and, I guess, get through this? I wouldn't say smooth sailing because it's not going to be. We've already seen too many deaths currently with suicide. But is there anything any topic or top of mind conversation that you've seen have from a leadership perspective to embrace the conversation with your staff to make sure that this is an open conversation and topic?
I think it's exactly what you're doing now, and it's raising it as a topic and opening up the dialogue and the conversation. and making it not just a part of an exceptional timeline, but actually it should become a part of the everyday dialogue, and be reflective in the moment of failure, right? And be reflective in the moment of success, and take those moments. I know in the midst of COVID, I'm running across 3 different time zones, and there was one day that I just mentally couldn't get out of bed. And normally for me, I'm up at 5 and I'm running hard, and I'm falling asleep with my face down on the pillow at midnight because I'm across many time zones. But to be kind to yourself in those moments, and just be one of those people to say, I'm just having a mental health day. You know, I called out to our team this week. We celebrated 5 years as Everledger right in the midst of COVID. And I literally just sent a message in the last 48 hours and said, guys, we're now calling a global Everledger Day. It's on the 1st of July. Cancel everything in your diaries. Cancel everything on that day. It's a global public holiday, self-declared by me. Go do whatever you want to do. If you still feel like you want to catch up on email, do that. But there's no pressure for you to be connected in the moment, communicating on Zoom calls, you know, championing that incremental change. So there needs to be more leaders to be able to stand up and do those. Not only sort of practice moments of communication, but randomized moments to say, let's just do it now. Be spontaneous in that moment.
That is epic. Yeah. I absolutely love that. That is so cool. I want to hear that from more leaders.
Yeah, and we've always encouraged mental health days, I think, because we work on project based and, you know, all collaborate across teams and countries and whatever. And sometimes that's big hours. So you just say, look, if anyone needs it, they put their hand up and just take the day, right? Because you'll make it up somewhere else anyway. But everyone's got to be, and we encourage everyone to be conscious of that themselves as well. And anyone else in the team, right? Tap them on the shoulder and say, you're right. You're okay. Let's go and have a drink or a chat or whatever. I think it's a lot of people I'm saying it's very much about them, but I think in this gives us an opportunity to look at our peers, you know, our friends, our fellow entrepreneurs and business owners, to say, look at that, just checking in, right? Are they okay? Because a lot of these CEOs and entrepreneurs too are so used to marketing the business, right? And their job is to be the strong one and come up with all the ideas. And, you know, they always say it's lonely at the top, and it absolutely is, right? So we all get it. And I think it's where we need to band together and support each other and just say, right, are you okay, right? Is there anything you need a hand with? And sometimes it's just, you know, they normally know the ideas anyway, right? They just need to vocalize it and get it out. Because you can't always talk to your partner or your friends about it.
Yeah, so it's just like holding that space, that's a comfortable space that we're all okay to have that conversation on. And you're right, I think Leanne, you hit the nail on the head. This seems to be just common conversation every single day of the week. Like it's not like an are you okay day and you know, trying to get the awareness out there. This is like, this is now life. It always has been, where we've just been, I don't know, too cautious to have this conversation or some bullshit. But now this is like, we need to just do it. Sorry, Vannesa?
Yeah, we're self-involved, right? Everyone's so busy. You need to stop and think to someone at the end.
Yeah. And like what you said, Leanne, like perfect. I'm taking the day off. Like I'm dead. I'm done.
Yeah. And, you know, for the first moment for me, I did take that day off. I was lying there. I binge watched something on Netflix, and then I knew tomorrow was going to be a busy day. But then I was like, you know what? I've never learned to play the guitar. I'm just going to go and get a guitar and then just see whether, and it's been the best thing, right? You can pick it up for an hour a day, and all of a sudden, I haven't gotten to the point of singing yet, because that would be a bit embarrassing, but I'm not too far off.
KTV. Love it. All right, so we'll definitely have to jump on another live in a few weeks from now, and you'll have to give us a rendition.
From pub choir to chief choir, who knows what the greatest hits are going to be.
Love it. Thank you very much, lovely ladies, for joining me. It's been an amazing conversation. Is there any last points you'd like to finish off on?
I don't have any more pearls of wisdom, actually. Now I've got to go binge watch another few chapters, read a book, play the guitar, and jump back on the chief channels tomorrow.
What are you binge watching at the moment?
What, sorry, was the question?
What are you binge watching at the moment?
Oh, I was binge watching Billions for a while, and then I'm off on this House on Fire that someone told me to take a look at. Oh, and I'm all over it. I've got one of those new smart TVs that I can program the lights and do all sorts of stuff. I'm loving it. Sick.
Nice. Love it. What about yourself, Vannesa? What are you binge watching right now? If you even get a chance to know you're switching.
I love doco, so I just put a doco on if I want to zone out and history, right? I always think history repeats in some form. what can we learn from? So it's always anything that's a doco or Netflix or bloody Foxtel I'm into.
Yeah, love it, love it. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Really do appreciate it. And I'll be catching up with you soon. Cheers.
No worries.
There you go.
Thank you. See you, everyone.
Thanks, Lucas.